ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this and He says, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ. Everyone wants to achieve piety. Everyone wants to achieve Jannah. Everyone wants to come closer to Allah. Everyone strives. We're thirsty for that relationship. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this. لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ. You will never, ever attain it. You will never attain it. حَتَّى Until تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You spend from that which you love. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in another place in the Quran, وَتُحِبُّونَ الْمَالَ حُبًّا جَمًّا. That we human beings, we truly love wealth. In another hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentions that the son of Adam will wish for a valley of gold. And in fact, even if he had that, he would wish for another one. And ultimately he would continue wishing, and the only thing that would truly satisfy his thirst is death. So this is something that we love. And this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning. If you truly want to attain piety, then you have to spend it for His sake. You have to give sadaqah fi sabilillah. And if sometimes we, mashallah, we are engaged in various different actions of ibadah, but one thing that we hesitate from time to time, especially those who do not have excess wealth, especially those who are struggling to save $200, $300 a month, is when it comes to spending for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if we ponder about all the ahadith of spending for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it will become actually easier for us to do so. That is why the ahadith exist. And the ulama, they mention that the only way to truly rid oneself of the love of this world is to spend the wealth of this world. That the more a person spends, it's as though the love of the wealth is slowly coming out of his heart when he does so. And there are tons and tons of ahadith talking about the virtues of this. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in a hadith, he has mentioned that inna sadaqata tutfi'u ghadab al-rabbi kama yutfi'u al-ma'u an-nar. Or kama qala an-nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that when a person spends for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, giving charity, sadaqah fi sabilillah, it extinguishes the anger and the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't know what sins we have committed. We don't know when we were disrespectful to various different salient features of the deen of Allah, for which we could have perhaps incurred the anger of Allah. But when a person gives charity and coupled with tawbah, then that immediately extinguishes any such wrath or anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just as effective as water is when it comes to extinguishing fire. In another hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has mentioned that تَدْفَعُ مِيتَةَ السُّوءِ. We all want to live a wonderful death, and we always want to live a wonderful life, and we all want to, inshallah, pass away with a wonderful death. But no one knows how they're going to die. No one knows in what condition they're going to die. No one knows when Malakul Maut, the angel of death, is actually going to come. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has mentioned in a hadith that one way to secure for yourself a peaceful, praiseworthy death, subhanallah, is by engaging in this act of charity. In another hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he has mentioned that كُلُّ امْرِئٍ فِي ظِلِّ صَدَقَتِهِ حَتَّى يُقْضَى بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. That on the day of judgment, that a person is going to benefit, every individual will benefit directly from the amount of charity that he spent, such that he will receive part of the shade of the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, also by engaging in giving, having given charity in this world. A person will also be able to benefit from the arsh of Allah, the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on the day of judgment. But it's mentioned proportionate to the amount that a person would give, based on how habitually he would give. One narrator of hadith, after hearing this particular hadith, not a single day passed except that he gave something in charity. That he gave something, even if it be as seemingly insignificant as a piece of cake, or as seemingly insignificant as a single biscuit, or even an onion, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Other narrators, they've heard this and they have ensured that even if I can at least give someone else some sort of charity by means of even giving them some itr that I love, something that is beloved to me that I spend for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make my fellow Muslim brother happy, to help him, to assist him, or to even merely bring happiness to his heart. This is something that is praiseworthy. And that's something that we should all focus on, that it doesn't necessarily matter about the amount, but it matters about merely giving. It's not necessarily about the amount that a person has to give, a significant large amount, but just giving and practicing giving for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that we will see the benefits of this in this worldly life itself. The scholars, they mention also another benefit of giving charity is tadfa'ul bala, that it actually wards off calamities. This is something that we should consider, that subhanallah, we give charity so many a times to other organizations or to other groups that are helping our brothers and sisters who are suffering throughout the world. And that is very praiseworthy, and we should continue to do so. But it's not only restricted to that. There are so many other ways that we can help and assist our brothers and sisters who are suffering. We can engage in dua, we can engage in a'mal, various different a'mal, dua, reading Quran, making dua after reading Quran, performing salah, nafil salah, making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the ways that we can also help and assist them, because some people, they wonder, what's the point of giving now if all aid that is given is half of it perhaps does not even reach them on time, or half of it perhaps doesn't even reach them at all, or it gets lost on the way. So what's another way that we can assist them? From the ahadith and from the scholars, we understand that one way to assist them is to give charity with the intention that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take away difficulty and take away calamities and provide ease. Spending anything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always yield in results. And it doesn't matter about the amount. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has mentioned in a hadith, he said, من تصدق بعدل تمرة من كسب طيب. That person who spends from his wealth, even to the extent of a portion of a date. And if you think about a portion of a date, how much does it cost to purchase an entire box of dates? In this day and age, maybe $20, maybe less than that. So imagine one date, and that too just a portion of a date. That individual who gives it, but he gives it from halal earnings. And he worked hard to attain that money, and he gives it for halal. He gives it with his halal earnings. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَقْبَلُ إِلَّا الطَّيِّبِ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned in the hadith, He only accepts pure wealth. Then what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shakur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is extremely appreciative of all of the different actions that we do. Whatever that we can muster, whatever we can manage, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is appreciative. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَتَقَبَّلُهَا بِيَمِينِهِ. Allah accepts it. ثُمَّ يُرَبِّيهَا. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks after that wealth. Like in this day and age, people tell us, which is not permissible for us, but if you look at any anyone who's into investments, especially if you read books on how to make wealth, then they'll all tell you one of the ways is put it in a savings account, and it'll accrue interest, compound interest. After a few good years, it'll constantly increase. But this is not permissible for a Muslim to engage in, because it's interest. But another way, subhanallah, that we can inshallah attain and earn wealth is by putting it into the bank account, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself is the one who's going to look after that wealth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself is going to look after it, and He's going to multiply it to such an extent that when a person comes on the Day of Judgment, he may have only given that small piece of date for the sake of Allah, but the reward will be so significant and so great that it will appear as great as having given an entire mountain for the sake of Allah. It will be so large, and a person will wonder, how in the heavens world did I never managed to give this amount of sadaqah? Then he'll be told, you remember that one time you gave this particular amount of charity, and you gave it with so much sincerity, solely for my sake? Well, I looked after it, and I continued looking after it, raising it, multiplying it, until now, subhanAllah, this is what you are blessed with. And in another hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has mentioned, مَا نَقَصَتْ صَدَقَةٌ مِّن مَالٍ. This is something that we have to truly believe. This is the promise of Allah, that whatever amount we give is not decreasing our wealth in the least bit. There are so many different benefits that we are going to be benefiting from, as far as Already what was mentioned, a person protecting themselves from a unpraiseworthy death, repelling, warding off calamities, extinguishing the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then also we understand Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned a hadith, ittaqun nara walau bishiqqi tamratin, that protect yourself from the fire of Jahannam. It'll be a protection from the fire of Jahannam if a person gives in this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It'll be a means of shade for them on the day of judgment. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam also mentions, ma naqasat sadaqatun min malin. He says that truly and ultimately when we are giving for the sake of Allah, we are not losing out on anything. We're not losing out on anything. We may give $10 and you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promises that He's going to multiply it. In a beautiful, wonderful hadith, in a beautiful, wonderful ayah of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يُقْرِضُ اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا. Who is there who is going to give for the sake of Allah? He's going to give a goodly loan for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions why? فَيُضَاعِفَهُ لَهُ أَضْعَافًا كَثِيرًا. So that Allah Himself may multiply it multiple folds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may multiply it. فَيُضَاعِفَهُ لَهُ أَضْعَافًا كَثِيرًا. We can't even understand this. Why? Because you only understand a person's statement based on their greatness themselves, based on their stature, their position in society. So if a child tells you, Allah here is saying, I'm going to multiply it multiple times, a lot, kathira, a lot. So if you think about it, if a child tells you, if you ask him, how much candy do you have? I have a lot of candy. He may have a handful of candy. If you ask a 15-year-old, how much candy do you have? You say, I have a lot of candy. He may have a bag of candy. If you ask an adult, how much candy do you have? So I have a lot of candy. He may have a whole pantry full of candy. Then you ask a businessman, how much candy do you have? I have a lot of candy. He has stores full of candy. So depending on his level, depending on how senior he is in his position in society, a lot, kathir, is going to have a different meaning. Now imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is Malikul Mulk, Dhul Jalali wal Ikram, who is possessor and king of everything in existence. If Allah is saying, subhanallah, subhanallah, I am going to multiply it multiple times, a lot, can we even imagine how much is in store for that person who gives for the sake of Allah? Then Allah continues and He says, Wallahu yaqbidu wa yabsut. Allah is the one who restrains a person's sustenance. He's the one who curbs a person's sustenance and He restricts it. Wa yabsut, and He is the one who expands a person's sustenance. So what are we waiting for? Don't you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is in control? Don't you know the more that we spend for His sake, the more Allah is going to bless us with? Don't we understand that this is the promise of Allah? وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ قِيلًا. So now let us ask ourselves, how much are we spending for the sake of Allah? In a beautiful hadith, Abdullah bin Salam, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he came to Medina Munawwara and he was visiting the Sahaba for the first time, many of them in Medina Munawwara, addressing many of them who now first accepted the fold of Islam and they entered, they're changing their lives. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave very pertinent, very important advice, and it was about 4 things. Amongst all the things He could have said, He chose to say 4 particular main core points that if they brought into their lives, it would result in very easy eternal success. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's mentioned when he came to Medina Munawwara, he said that afshu salam, spread the greeting of salam, wa at'imu ta'am, and he also mentioned one of the things was feed others food. In other words, also give some sort of charity, even if it means feeding another human being. And in fact, the scholars have mentioned here, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, at'imu ta'am, give food. To this extent, if a person even gave food to an animal, so that he does not waste it, and he made the intention that I'm giving this to look after this particular animal, then too he will inshallah also be included in this particular hadith. وَأَطْعِمُوا الطَّعَامِ وَصِلُوا الْأَرْحَامِ, maintain family ties, and وَصَلُّوا بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامٌ, perform salah when the people are all sleeping at night. تَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ بِسَلَامٍ. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned, if you implement all the 4 of these things, one of them being spending for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, تَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ بِسَلَامٍ, you will enter Jannah very peacefully, very easily. Again, at the very beginning we mentioned, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ, that Allah is saying you will never attain piety, you will never attain righteousness, you will never attain proximity to Allah, you will never come close to Jannah, حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, until you give from that which you love. So this is something that we all have to do. We all should, not that we all have to do, mashallah, we are already doing, but we should consistently do. We should make it a point, inshallah, to set aside some amount of our wealth and give some sort of charity every single week, if possible, every single week, or maybe even every single day, depending on everyone's ability and depending on what they can manage. And if we spend on our family with the right intention also, that will also be a means of charity. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he mentions, al-yadu al-ulya khayru min al-yad al-sufla, wabda biman ta'ulu, start with those who are your dependents. So if a person also spends on the family with the intention of sadaqah fi sabilillah, you will also attain this reward. Lastly, we discussed again the benefits of spending for the sake of Allah. The whole entire aspect that when a person spends for the sake of Allah, Allah is the one who's in control of our wealth. Truly spending for the sake of Allah will never diminish a person's wealth, but rather it will be a means of barakah and increase sustenance. Another thing to keep in mind when spending for the sake of Allah is that whoever we spend on, and for whatever sake that we are spending, we're not helping them, but rather we are helping ourselves. We're never helping anyone else, but rather we are making our own akhirah. The minute that we think that we are helping someone else and that they are in need of this charity and I am doing a favor to them, then no sooner do we have that mindset than we start losing out on all of our thawab. And that instead of becoming a means of doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, solely for His pleasure, to attain proximity, to attain Jannah, to attain His rewards, we feel that we do it as a favor for someone else, then our reward will immediately diminish. Similarly, when we are spending for others, we should always think that we are actually spending for our benefit. We are attaining proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are coming close. We are attaining the du'as of the angels. As the angels, they mention every single day that Allahumma a'ti munfiqan khalafa. Oh Allah, give that particular individual who spent for your sake replacement. Give him back his wealth. And they make dua against those who do not spend for the sake of Allah, that Ya Allah, destroy them and do not place any barakah in their wealth. So when we are giving for others, Mufti Shafi Sahib, he mentioned a very, very beautiful example, and I'll end off with this. Once his son, Mufti Taqi, the very famous Mufti Taqi Sahib, Hafidhullah, in Pakistan, he was walking with his father, and they were entering the car. And when they entered the car, then there was a beggar who came. And you know, in many of these countries, sometimes there are beggars who are, genuine. They're needy. And then there are others who, they're not necessarily needy, but it's their profession. They're professionals, and that's how they make money. So this particular individual, it just seemed as though he was not needy. He was not genuine. So Mufti Taqi Sahib, his father, Mufti Shafi, gave the money. He said, give this to him. So he gave it to him. Then when he got in the car, he said, oh, my father, he didn't look like he actually needed it. You could have given it to someone else. He didn't really look like he needed it. So Mufti Shafi Sahib mentioned such a beautiful lesson for all of us to think about. He said, oh, my beloved son, what would your condition and my condition be if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only gave to us if we were truly in need? Subhanallah. But rather, we're not helping Him. We're helping ourselves. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all the tawfiq to spend for His sake. There's so many different avenues that we can spend in. We can spend for our brothers and our sisters who are suffering throughout the world. So many different people who are suffering throughout the world, various different countries. We can spend to help our brothers and sisters in Palestine. We can spend to help our brothers and sisters in China. We can spend to help our brothers and sisters in India, Pakistan, throughout the entire world. And we can also spend to help and better our communities that are here, to help and better the individuals that are also needy in our communities, to help this masjid and to help other masjid. One of these particular opportunities is to aid and assist for the cause of spreading the deen of Islam by aiding and supporting the Dar es Salaam community as they are having their banquet dinner, inshallah, is going to be taking place on the 9th of December. So all the brothers and sisters are humbly requested to join and participate, to also spend and support that cause, as at the end of the day, this is supporting the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is one of the only ways that we can secure for ourselves a means of sadaqah jariyah. That when we aid to any institution, any masjid for that matter, any institution that is propagating the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we are essentially aiding ourselves by providing ourselves a lasting charity. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all the ability to do so. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all ikhlas when we spend for His sake. May Allah grant us the tawfiq to also spend for His sake. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. All the brothers can stand and perform their sunnah. Jazakumullah khairah.